Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast, where HR, benefits, and total rewards leaders explore the future of workplace well-being. I'm your host, Sokoler, founder and CEO of Journey, the leading proactive mental health solution for modern companies. In each episode, we bring you expert insights, real-world strategies, and candid conversations on creating healthier, more productive workplaces. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mental Health Advantage podcast. Today, I'm joined by Marissa Andrada, wonderful person. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Board director, people leader, who's helped shape cultures at some really iconic brands, ones that many of us know and love and interact with all the time. Companies like Chipotle and Starbucks, Red Bull, and Kate Spade. How are you doing today?
I'm excellent. I'm feeling sunny on this very sunny day in Brooklyn.
I love that. Well, like I said, I'm excited to have this conversation. Let's hop right in. So you spent your career in high growth, what I would think would be high pressure environments. When did it click for you that mental health at work isn't a separate issue, but a signal of how the whole system is functioning?
It's funny. I think about these brands that you talked about on the introduction. And really for the past 20 plus years, I've served in that CHRO role, reporting into the CEO. And I think it really clicked for me working at Red Bull. So Red Bull energy drink in North America, it was the first kind of energy drink that created the category. And what I remembered when I first joined is that this brand is so vibrant and it was so much for surf and skate. And I think the role of human resources, or at least coming in and inheriting a team, is that HR seems so disconnected from the brand. And I'll get there with mental health. And what I observed was people who related to this energy drink category, especially surfers, skaters, motocross, there was a lot of vibrancy and energy. And then I thought, wow, to work inside this organization, we should be reflecting this brand. And you think about overall well-being, emotionally, mentally, that if this brand is portraying this action and energy on the outside, it feels like we should be feeling that same way inside the brand. And so to me, while I didn't call it mental wellness directly, to me, it was about the energy, and no pun intended. I think about if a brand really brings energy, then we inside the organization should be feeling that. And so I spent a lot of time and had such a great relationship with our CEO, who I think grew up as a chief marketing officer. And when we talked about the brand, it really translated to the people experience, not just the customer's experience, but the employees inside. And so it's my long way of saying, once I connected the dots on what is the collective experience that we're creating as a brand, it has a lot to do with how people feel and how they show up every day and how they feel ready to show up every day to give all they can. And, it was such a special time working there. And I think about my team specifically and how disconnected they felt. I think maybe it's because, like many HR departments, they kind of by accident show up and become the HR department. And what I really wanted from my team was, if we're not feeling the energy, then why? How do we get to that? And it does get personal, like to really get to that personal side and then get them connected to, their why, to why we're here as a company. And so, yeah, I think to me, it was Red Bull, and it was about that collective experience that we could bring to life and how personal it is for employees to want to bring their best every day.
I love that. And you often talk about mental health as an outcome, right? Not a standalone initiative. What is a whole person approach, financial, emotional, physical, social? What does that look like in practice?
Well, I think it's about, I'm a big believer in a philosophy of mine in the roles that I played in human resources. It's a vision that I have for people. And it's all about how do you cultivate environments where everyone can thrive. So I'm a big believer that companies can't grow unless you grow people. Companies can't scale unless you scale people. So when I think of a whole person approach, sometimes when we think about managing employees, it's really kind of stops at the door. When you get inside the door, it's all about what's happening inside the company. But the reality is that human beings actually bring themselves to work, whether it's hybrid, working remotely, working full time. And I think wellness is an outcome of how you actually treat people because again, it's a correlation to you need to invest in the whole person and invest in their growth in order to grow the company. And here's what I mean by that. The whole person is, when people were going down this path, this is probably back in 2020, 2021, and everyone was talking about mental well-being and investing in these virtual counseling programs. And it kind of stopped there. But if you think about what drives mental wellness, it's just how someone's living every day. And I think about the front line, many of whom I've supported in my career. You think about what creates joy and or what creates stress for human beings every day. And typically it's what they start with at home, whatever the definition of home is, and the responsibilities that they carry. And typically, having worked with a lot of frontline minimum wage plus environments where the employees not only have this job, but they also probably have 2 or 3 other jobs to kind of hustle to keep life together. That overall well-being is, mental probably comes from a place of, am I going to get a consistent paycheck? Do I have enough hours that I'm going to work? Which then drives this financial well-being. How am I managing my money so that I can provide for myself and or the family, not only my family, but then likely in generations of families that I'm supporting at home. And that's what I mean about the whole person, is that it's not just let's slap on a benefit that gives you counseling for the employee, but it's really about helping that person have some tools to really feel like they have agency and control over how they're living their life. And, whether that's financial well-being tools, even teaching people how to budget to give them tools to do that. It's about the physical well-being as well. Simple things like moving every day, laughing every day, tips like that. I think that contribute to then this kind of emotional and mental well-being. I think it's really important. And so it's actually seeing people as who they are, not just once they walk in the door, they're an employee. It's just realizing where they're coming from and that there is a system of support that needs to happen. I know I just kind of went down this avenue, but I think it's this whole person approach that most people say business is business, but I think business is personal. And you have to realize that human beings, first and foremost, are showing up every day. And how do you create a system where they feel like they have control and say over what they're doing? And again, I think most organizations kind of say, well, here's the performance tools, here are the goals that we expect you to accomplish, and we're going to train you on how to do that, which I think is great for the organization. But then for organizations to recognize, how do you get the best out of people when behind the scenes you need to allow them to bring? So I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And I think it's one of those things where we show up fully as humans. And maybe in the past, we didn't say, oh, well, what happened at work is showing up at home, or what's happening at home is showing up at work. But that's happening, right? It's not like the TV shows where we're just, cut off and it's a separate person. But it's one of those things where whether we speak about it or not, you're showing up to work. And if you just got into a fight with your spouse or your child struggling or anything like that, that is going to impact your work, and you are going to take it home with them, especially in today's hybrid environment. So that being said, where do you think leaders, whether it's executives or managers, most commonly underestimate how these non-work stressors show up first as mental health or even performance issues at work?
I think it's in the everyday. Here's what I mean by that. We all lived through COVID. We all knew that we were living with uncertain times and stress of just, what is this pandemic that we're dealing with? How is that going to impact my life? And I think everyone was on alert. Talk about the day-to-day managers. And again, I'm speaking from a place of having served a lot of frontline employees. It's really about understanding that what it takes for them to even show up every day. And I think the underestimation of, I learned this at Starbucks. Actually, I was there for an opening. I was training and went there to help open the cafe. And I was chatting with employees. These 2 employees took 3 buses, took them about an hour to get to the location. Where I think in the everyday, like leaders not understanding if not everyone has the same life that you do, and that for them to show up every day takes different challenges than you have. I think about traveling with a peer at another organization, and we were children, and how it was coming home from college, like her first year from college, and how she was going to come home last minute. I think I might want to get an apartment and stay where I'm staying instead of come home for the summer. And I think he was heartbroken. And he said, you remember those days, Marissa, like college, and coming home and mom being able to do your laundry, and what his experience was. And I thought, well, I didn't have that upbringing at all. That wasn't my experience at all. I had to work my way to get through college, and there wasn't that someone can do my laundry. So I share those two stories because it's in the everyday that leaders don't take on where that person's coming from and who they are, because it's always like, all right, let's get ready to get to work. And I'm going through this theme of work is so personal. Unless you really get to know your people, you don't know how to bring the best out of them.
Yep. Let's talk about mental health as a performance strategy. So you've led people strategy at brands where the performance pressure is real and constant. Why do you believe mental health belongs in the conversation about performance and growth and profitability, not just care and compassion and doing the right thing?
Well, I think it's all about the experience. When you and I started talking about where did I connect the dots between mental health as an advantage for a company, and mental health really is about, especially for consumer facing companies. I always talk about the experience that you're creating for the people, and it's broadly the experience for the customer, and then the experience for the employee, and then the direct impact of how employees actually contribute will impact how the customers experience that brand. And so when I think about mental health, again, I think about broadly, are you cultivating an environment where people feel like they can thrive? Are you creating a relationship where people feel confident that they can be and bring their best every day? And so when we talk about creating cultures of performance, it's not just about here's the what we want you to do. It's how we want you to do it. And that's the role that I think values and purpose play in an organization. That's how I think mental health and well-being comes to life, through tying it to the company's mission and or vision, and then the values that they're trying to bring every day to the organization. It's not just the what and the strategy and or the objectives. It's how we actually get the work done. And so when leaders think about high-performing organizations, it's not going to happen by accident and just by pushing people. It's about cultivating an environment where people understand the values that are important to the organization, like how we show up every day. And to me, that does tie emotion and mental connection to why people want to be here every day and why they want to work so hard for the company. And so I think tying that to creating cultures of performance, I've seen companies really excel when they do focus on not only the what, but also the how. And they come to life through values, and then more systemically or systematically throughout the organization, how those values come to life. And especially specifically the role that leaders play in, managing and setting expectations of employees, utilizing those values.
And how does this, I agree completely, how does this mindset help to move the organization from a reactive model where you're simply trying to treat things versus to a proactive model and culture where it's much more preventive and much more part of the fabric of the ecosystem?
Well, I think when companies get really clear, I'll go back to purpose and values. When companies get really clear about that, it starts with how we treat each other, how we roll together. Values are not just words on a wall, but it's really a way of being. And so when I think about it's not reactive, I think people actually check each other when they're not showing up in a space that this is the culture that we're trying to create and cultivate around us. And when you're not showing up in that way, it's, people naturally check each other. And then when you talked about how you're proactive about it, again, I think you have to weave that into the performance management system of the organization. And so it starts from weaving those values or behaviors into the hiring profile. Like, who are we going to hire? Are they in the likeness of these values? And when you set expectations and manage people with it, it's really setting that expectation of not only what you're going to do, but how you get it done. And then when you reward for it, when companies do well, of course, people then get paid more, right? They might get a bonus. They might get an increase in their pay. They also might even get stock options. And I think when you weave in, again, values-based performance, that also makes it more proactive because people now know the why. What's in it for me? Why am I doing this in the first place?
Thanks for listening to the first half of the episode. I hope you're walking away with some valuable insights. I want to take a quick pause to tell you about my book, The Mental Health Advantage. If you found this conversation useful, you'll find 300 more pages packed with strategies, insights, and real-world applications. Grab your copy on Amazon. Just check the show notes for the link. And if you're looking for a more comprehensive mental health solution for your company, let's chat. You'll find another link in the show notes to reach out and explore how Journey can help you. Now back to the show. And so you've talked about psychological safety. The term's been around for a while. You've spoken about belonging. How do you think of those things as foundational to well-being? So how do they act as preventive mental health support and really allow employees and a culture to thrive?
Oh my gosh, psychological safety. I know it's not a new term, and I do think it's foundational to creating a culture of wellness. And psychological safety is just really about people feeling like they can be and bring their full selves, even if they're not having a great day, right? And I think when leaders, and you already said this, when leaders acknowledge the whole human kind of showing up to work every day, and that they feel safe to kind of show up and not feel like they have to put on an act to get the work done, I think it's really important. Some work that we do at Wolf World, where I work right now, is that we have a client who is in media. I'll just say that. And they have a frontline that is always reporting on all of the not great things happening in the world, right? It's really stressful. And in working with that team and working with that CHRO, it's kind of like, well, when the employees show up and they're dealing in the front line, when they're reporting on all of the unique, not great things, crazy things happening in the world, how do you make sure that they feel like they're supported, And one thing that we talk about is, do they feel psychologically safe? Meaning, do they feel like they can actually come back from reporting on these wild issues that are happening in life and actually decompress with it and bring that back into the organization to a space where the managers are going to listen, and also acknowledge that wasn't easy. And so when I think about that, especially being in front lines, but then you even take that to working in a restaurant or working in retail and dealing with not happy customers, but really angry customers, right? I think that basis of psychological safety is letting employees know that even when things don't go 100% with how you expect them to be and something random comes at you, know that it's okay to bring that back and express yourself. I think that that foundation, I think, is really important to know that it's safe to do that in a way that you don't feel like you're complaining or you're not acting in a way that the company wants you to behave. So, I think that's really, really important. Again, it goes back to this whole personal notion of my leader, my manager cares about me personally.
I know that you and I could probably spend many, many days, weeks talking about HR strategy, human psychology, all that sort of stuff. But I feel like now's a good time to talk about Wolf World, something that I'm very excited about. It's, puts a smile on everybody's face. Why don't you tell us what it is, what you're doing there? We'd love to start talking about that.
Okay, so Wolf World, WUF, WUF is an acronym for With You Forever. The founders actually came up with this notion that it's about how do you create community and connection through the conversation and actually connecting through pets. And when I met our founders, Clinton and Joe, they actually were creating this kind of human gathering around every weekend, whether or not you have a dog, come to Saturday Dog Club. So fast forward when we met, when they were saying, come to Saturday Dog Club, we were meeting a lot of people who then said, now I'm being asked to go to the office. So they brought this together, knowing that out of COVID, loneliness with the Surgeon General at the time was the next pandemic, like loneliness, and how people need to feel connected. And a really easy way to do that physically was through pets. And so they went from creating this community in LA over a year and a half, 25,000 people came out just to be together, right? To connect through pets, and local businesses were giving discounts, et cetera. And then people were then saying, I have to go back to the office. I wish that my employer understood how important my pets are to me. And so they said, Marissa, how do we do that? And while I say it's not easy, I think it is about tying to the culture that these large enterprise companies are creating. And therefore, I joined them a few years ago. I serve as their chief culture officer. And more specifically, we've worked with large enterprise companies to actually connect people through the joy of the conversation through pets. And here's what I mean by that. We actually celebrate best pet workplaces. This does not mean that pets are in the office. The reality is only 7% of pets can be in the office, term, and according to their survey. But it's a people through the conversation of having pets. We have this series called Pets Behind the People. Beautiful thing about it is that, leaders and human beings have a hard time talking about themselves, but they actually have talking about their cat or their dog and what happened to them. And then people actually connect to that. And so it's interesting if you are a pet person or not, it's just seeing kind of this joy that people have when they actually become human and talk about their pets. And so what we do is for the organizations to actually celebrate and amplify their culture through the conversation of pets. And so there are Pets Behind the People series that we have. We have gone on site to organizations where now they're being asked for, but then they also have these amazing pet supportive policies like, we give you a few days off when you want to go adopt a pet, or if you are grieving a pet, that it's also part of your bereavement, or we provide you access to pet insurance. Because what we've found is, from a human standpoint, since we're talking about mental wellness, HABRI, which is a human animal bond, they did a study recently where they have found that in the US, almost $23 billion is saved annually in human health, pet parenthood. Because you think about like having a pet forces you to walk them and take care of them, care of something else. You've got to take care of someone else. There's data out there that shows that there's lower absenteeism when employees see that there's a pet-friendly company, and pet-friendly meaning pet-friendly benefits, and actually seeing companies hold on to people because they're pet-friendly.
And you're working with many enormous companies doing this with these initiatives. And it's incredible to see. What have you learned about the role of pets in reducing stress, increasing connection, building resilience, specifically in the workplace? I think we all know, you see a dog walking down the street or something like that, like assuming you like dogs, it makes you smile. There's a certain innate connection there. But what have you seen about the impacts for organizations?
You're right. They are very large organizations. I think the ability, we were talking about creating psychologically safe environments. We have seen has created like this level of trust in an organization in a very organic and natural way. And so we're seeing that it's creating joy. So joyful conversations about something that people want to relate to naturally reduces stress. And so we're seeing across different, I think about, the different industries that we work with, when we are able to organize them around the pet conversation, they're seeing that. And, we look at specific measures like engagement. We look at certain measures like trust and management. If you look at those two things, there's a relationship there to reducing stress.
Why do pet-friendly workplaces often create stronger social bonds and a greater sense of joy and belonging?
I think it's like what naturally happens for yourself. I think about, if you think about a human being, even spending 10 or 15 minutes, there's data out there that shows 10 or 15 minutes of just sitting with your pet kind of reduces your own stress levels, and then I share the healthcare savings that happen. And when you talk about acknowledging that for the rest of the organization, I wish I could give you more data, but how does it create more joy? The fact that you care about something that employees care about increases that level of joy and connection in the organization. And if I think about generationally, there's 5 or 6 generations now in the workforce. Everyone comes from a different point of view. And I think a naturally unifying conversation has been around pets. At least we've seen it. And that there's this natural energy and joy that comes to that when you bring people together around it.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that I think is so innate and so human and can bring people together in such an authentic way and create that safe space that many of us crave and are lacking in our workplaces. So I love the work that you and Clinton and Joe are doing. So thank you for that. Any final words on mental health, on the work that you're doing at Woof before we part?
Yeah, I think with mental health, and I think you and I have talked about this offline, it's important for people to know that mental health is not a program where you go to the company and say, I hope that you provide, there's so many mental health programs that are out there, meaning benefits that are now an add-on, access to mental health online, et cetera. I think mental wellness for an organization is a leadership imperative. And what I mean by that is at the end of the day, the one thing I was going to say is that mental well-being in the workplace, psychological safety in the workplace is all dependent on the manager and leadership's ability to create trust in the organization. And the only way that can happen is when leaders actually take these barriers down, which is why I love this conversation around pets, because pets naturally help you do that. But I think mental health is actually a leadership imperative, and it's about leaders creating an environment where you can be open and be trusting with your employees and that you're interested in them. And I think when you create that kind of environment where leaders do that as a whole, I think that's what mental well-being is in an organization. That's what's going to help amplify performance or amplify the culture of your organization. And if I take that down to an individual level, I believe that the most critical role that a manager of a person can play, in mental wellness and mental well-being is to inspire confidence in that individual, that you believe in who they are and everything that they are, and that you want them to bring it all, whether it's good or bad, great thinking, great ideas, bad ideas. I think companies need that, to continue to grow and innovate and to thrive.
I love that. That feels like a great place to end. This has, as with all our conversations, been insightful, inspiring. I'm grateful for you as a friend. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing. The fact that you are able to change so many lives through your work, through your partnerships is just incredible. So thank you for doing that work. And for everybody listening, we'll put in the show notes where you can learn more about Woof and follow Marissa and all her great work. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Thanks for spending this time with us. We know you're busy. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Mental Health Advantage and leave a review. Thanks so much and have a beautiful day.